Good morning, everyone. It's good to see you and to be with you. If you have been here for the last couple weeks, or just actually at any service at church for the last couple weeks, you will recognize that there's a really good possibility we're going to be talking about Sabbath this morning. Sabbath has been our theme in terms of programming, sure, but really just like we have a very few kind of organizational goals right now as a church. And among them are that we just need so badly to experience and understand and incorporate God's rest into our lives. And as I have said that for the last few weeks, and as I'm sure you've heard many sermons for the last few weeks, a question that frequently pops up in relation to this is, well, why? I've heard it every week in some forum, in the men's Bible study, in the rector's forum, at the door after sermons. Usually it's like, good sermon, good sermon, good sermon. Not always. And then from time to time, you get the handshake that's just like, why? Why are we even talking about this right now? It's an important question. I think that probably most of you, either in the sermon or in some other way, have heard us talking about how important it is to rest for the sake of restoration, to have returned to us something of our identity, to have returned to us that peace that comes from God after 6 days or many years or a lifetime of hard work, right? That's how we have generally framed that. Well, today I want to reframe it in addition, not to replace that understanding, but I just want to add something to it. And that's this, that the rest that God gives us on the Sabbath and in God's holiness is more about our future than it is our past. It's not the reward we get for 6 days of hard work. It's the thing that allows us to do the next 6 days or the next 6 years or the next part of our lifetime, and to do it in a particularly holy way. So there are a lot of ways that we can kind of look around to see this. I actually want to return you to that reading from Isaiah to pick up another story. So hear me. We're going to talk about Sabbath by going back to Isaiah to pick up a thing from Isaiah to go to another place. Just follow along for a second. So actually, I didn't mention this to Josh earlier, but Josh, if you will put that reading back on the screen, I'm going to read it one more time just so we hear it together. Sorry, thank you. You're wonderful. So why do you say, O Jacob, and speak, O Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord, my right is disregarded by my God? Have you not known? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He does not faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable. He gives power to the faint, strengthens the powerless. Even youths will faint and be weary, and the young will fall exhausted. But those who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not be faint. Isaiah writes this at a troubling time in the history of Israel. This is within a century following the greatest sort of national disaster that they've ever faced. The temple has been destroyed. The leaders of the people have been cast into exile. All is kind of lost. They have no sense of a future. God is no longer with them is their primary sense. And they begin to wonder, how is it that God, we can still say that God cares about us? As it says, how can you say my way is hidden or that my right has been disregarded by God? That's what they're beginning to wonder. And Isaiah preaches hope to them always, but does so utilizing their past in a particularly beautiful way. He starts it off by saying, have you not heard, O Jacob? Don't you know, O Israel? Or why do you say, O Jacob? Why do you say, O Israel? Those are two names, Jacob and Israel, that are not just talking about a people group, right? The Israelites. It talks about their ancestor. Some of you will know this story because you've been around Sunday school for, forever. Some of you will never have heard this story before, so I'll be Not as thorough as I would be in a Sunday school class, but I want to tell you the story in a way that lets you kind of know it a little bit better. Jacob is the name of the character when the story starts. Jacob is one of the great, 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 great ancestors of the Jewish people. One of the first of a line of patriarchs and matriarchs that will pass the promises of God down from generation to generation. Not because they are heroes in the story. In fact, most of the time, there's something deeply flawed about them. But God's not going to be thwarted. God finds a way to work through eventually one family to become a tribe, and from one tribe to become a nation, and from that nation to bless all the world, as God promised thousands of years before. So Jacob and his brother Esau are twins. And when they are born, there is already something going on. Jacob is a fighter, a struggler. He's the one who grabs on to the heel of his brother while his brother, they're twins, but the brother's being born first, and he tries to pull him back in. Me first. When he comes into the world, he is always a trickster. He's the kind of person who knows what he wants, and he knows that to get it, he's going to have to be a little bit more conniving than everyone else. He's not the strongest person in the world. That's his brother Esau. But he's pretty darn smart. He has this way about him that the analogy that I always use is that Esau is kind of playing checkers and not always playing checkers well. Jacob's playing chess, and no one else even knows it yet. Eventually, what happens is he steals his brother's birthright. His brother is the firstborn son, and inheritance laws would mean that Esau would get all sorts of stuff, including his father's blessing, but also a lot of property. Jacob finds a way to trick his brother and his father to make sure that he receives the lion's share of the inheritance. As you can imagine, Jacob and Esau don't grow up to be friends after that moment. There's going to be a disaster waiting for them, but they go their separate ways. They learn a lot in the process of going their separate ways, as we do when we harm our family members or are harmed by our family members and then run away for a long time. So we have this way of becoming wiser. And yet there is that moment where the family comes back together that causes sometimes, deep dread, in my case anyway. That is Jacob, as he knows that one day soon he's going to be reunited with his brother Esau. He has a restless night's sleep, and during that night he wrestles, he says, with God. He holds on tight. The next day he believes that he's going to die at the hand of his brother. So there's no way he's letting go of God in this moment. It might be his last chance to have life. He asks God for a blessing. And God says, at daybreak, I bless you, but your name will no longer be Jacob. Your identity will be changed to Israel. For you have wrestled and held on and striven with and struggled with God. And God has held on to you. And now you are ready to do the rest of your life. He goes on to be reconciled with his brother. He goes on to receive the promise that God had given to his father and his father's father, to be a blessing to all the nations. He becomes the person who can be, even though he's still a broken human being, can be the hero of the story, so to speak, which is definitely not who he was before. Jacob couldn't sleep that night because he was so concerned. He couldn't rest because he was so concerned about his past. God was infinitely more concerned about Jacob's future. The ability to hold on to God and to recognize that God is holding on to us isn't just about our past, it's about our future. Now go back to Isaiah, who is speaking to a people who believe that they don't have a future. Believe their future is lost, and they are way too much concerned about their past, living with the grief of what's just happened to them. In their mind, there is no future. In God's mind, these are still the people who carry the promises of God, who carry the prophecy that one day a Messiah will come to redeem the whole world, that God's peace is an everlasting peace. These are the people. And if they don't learn how to look forward instead of just looking back, there's no chance that they'll be able to survive this moment. And so Isaiah says to them, haven't you heard, O Jacob? Don't you know, O Israel? Why do you say my way is disregarded, O Jacob? Don't you understand, O Israel? You get it? He calls back to that ancient story that's in their DNA and in their minds. You once were Jacob. But as a people, we've learned how to hold on to God so tightly, and God has been holding on to us so tightly that God is so much more worried about who we will be than who we have been. Because God has a purpose for us, just like God had a purpose for Jacob, whom God changed to Israel, that he might become the father of many, might become the one who passes that blessing down to the next generation and the generations after. Sabbath, as it were, the waiting for God so that we can mount up on wings like eagles. The learning how to do that's not just about our past. It's not that it's not at all about our past. If you've been practicing Sabbath for the last few weeks, I hope you've kind of found some of that. The week leads into Sabbath, and we finally get to Sabbath and just go, oh, thank God. For a minute, anyway. But it's not just about that. It's also about what happens next. It's about where we go now that we've had our identity restored. And not just the identity that says this is who we have been, but more importantly, the identity that says this is who we will be. That God absolutely has a purpose for us, and that God is preparing us for that purpose. If you ask me why, if you had asked me why, let's say it this way. Back in April, we had started planning to talk about Sabbath a lot this fall. I would have said it's so that we can learn how to rest. We're a people that go and go and go. It's so important for us to step out of that because we are called to be a different kind of people than the rest of the world. That's true. If you had asked me back then why, I would say because this is a building block for all the other things that we do as disciples, and that's true. But more and more I am seeing that, like the Israelites, we are a people both in our, well, not just both, but in our families, in our church, in our society, all the places that I look, we are a people who keep running into these difficult times. For years now and years, and maybe it's just always been this way, but it seems so different right now. Look into this congregation and know your stories enough to know that there are very few that have a life that any of us would call easy. We all have our challenges. Look into this world around us and into our society, and the challenges are so clear. Look into the life of this church, and we have faced so much just in this year. Scan back to April and think about where we've come. I know for some of you, you haven't been here for very long, and so that look back into the past might not go much past April. I won't even name all the things that we've been through, but just to say this, it's fair for us to talk about our difficulties and to talk about being tired as a church. But it's most important that we understand that every time we come together to rest in the presence of God, we gain new clarity about who we are and what we might be doing next. So more than ever, I believe that the Sabbath that we are learning about and experiencing together and incorporating into our lives, it's not just about resting from our labor. It's about resting for our labor. It's not just looking back at our difficulty. It's looking forward to the promise that God says to us about our purpose in this world, about the difference we can make when we follow in the paths of holiness. God's much more concerned with our future than God is with our past. And so, like Jesus, though we have done hard work and we have healed and we have done the ministry of God in this world, it's important for us to retreat from time to time and rest in God's goodness. Not because we're too tired, but because there is much more work to be done. Not because we're depleted, but because we're holy. Drawing near to God in the presence of God on God's Sabbath day, on our holy day, on this Lord's day, in this church, holds us close to our story in a way that lets us see the next chapter. And so I ask you, are you close enough to God to see the next chapter? Are you resting in God enough to know what is next? Are you resting, more importantly, enough in God that even if you don't know what's next, you know that you will run and not grow weary, that you will walk and not faint, that strength will be returned to those who would otherwise be powerless, power to those who wait on the Lord, no matter what comes next. As Christ's church, we will step forward in faith to do the ministry that God puts before us. Because we are ones who hold so tightly to each other. We are ones who hold tightly to God. And more important than either one of those things, we are ones that God clings tightly to hold us up, to support us when we become weary, to change who we are, and to send us forward in peace and holiness the days of our life. Amen.